My name is Alessandra Vaccari, and I am an associate professor at the University of Venice. And today my paper is about Uchronia as a pedagogical tool. Uchronia is the most speculative and experimental concept of time in the field of fashion that I have explored in the research carried out with Caroline Evans and published in 2019 and 2020. The research investigated the unorthodox relationship between fashion and time rather than considering time in a conventional sense, that means past, present, and future. We work on three alternative ways to conceive it: industrial, antilinear, and uchronic. I was particularly fascinated by Uchronia for its capacity for fantasy and myth-making, and also as a form of alternate history that asks, what if? I experimented this concept in a series of collaborative conversations carried out at the Università di Venezia in Italy in summer 2020 that involved the master's students of visual arts and fashion. These conversations explored the role that Uchronia could have in teaching and learning fashion, and particularly fashion history. So fashion and Uchronia. With its propensity to act as a dream machine that creates idealized world and illusory times, fashion has been considered one of the most contradictory aspects of Western culture. Its gleaming and dreamy facade often hides the realities of suffocating factories, precariousness, and labor exploitation, as pointed out by the criticism that Karl Marx expressed against fashion in the 19th century, and that goes all the way to the recent debate on fast fashion, offshore manufacturing, and environmental issues. The paper challenges the fashion's dominant idea of fantasy freed from any ethical consideration that date back to the 19th century idea of l'art pour l'art. That means a total independence of the artist whose creative faculties don't need moral justification and should be free from any didactic purpose and political goal. The paper relies on the concept of Uchronia, which is modeled on the word utopia, no place, invented by Thomas More to describe a fictionally island and an ideal society. Uchronia, no time, was a neologism in the 19th century coined by French author Charles Renouvier in his book Uchronia, The Utopia in History, in which he rewrote European history, starting from the impossible hypothesis that the fall of the Roman Empire had never happened. The concept of fashion is Uchronia, come of course also from Roland Barthes, the fashion system. As utopia means no place, according to Barthes, Uchronia refers to a time that does not exist. But Uchronia also means imagines time and fictional times. As such, it engenders many possibilities for innovative thinking and enables progressive narratives. For instance, the Afrofuturist phenomenon, in which offers an inventive reclamation of Black identity through performance, self-fashioning, and styling. Uchronia encompasses the uchronic manipulation of temporal processes, which can have a transformative effect and real implication when they allow people to bring the intended future into existence, as the anthropologist Felix Ringel stated. Here we can see the Marchesa Casati in a dress costume symbolizing the light designed by Ward at the beginning of the 1920s. And one of the key advantages of Uchronia is the capacity of including both past and future, allowing the invention of possible futures and rewriting of the past, as in the case of the above-mentioned Afrofuturism, here in the picture, and Renouvier invention of the history of the Roman Empire, respectively. In the field of fashion, progressive and life-changing narratives include the otherworldly, the post-human fantasies made possible by digital fashion image making, and overall political and environmental activism. What If is presented here as a key methodological tool for the identification and analysis of the uchronic discourses in fashion. What if is the question that typically introduces an alternate history, and for this reason is at the basis of this approach to uchronic time. For example, what if Africa were the richest continent in the world? This idea was behind the provocative advertising campaign launched by Diesel Fashion Company in 2001, featuring the fictional newspaper The Daily Life, in which black models lounge in limousines or luxury offices under headlines such as African expedition to explore unknown Europe by foot. Imagine Africa's supremacy as a world power. The purpose of What If approach is twofold. The first is to investigate the transformative power of fashion, relying on its peculiar way of constructing its own scenarios from what is not existing yet. The second stems from looking at speculative practices in the current and vast debate of the redefinition of fashion itself. Speculative fashions means here an hypothetical fashion which could give a real indication on how fashion could be or could become. Similarly, uchronic fashion allows one to build fantastic scenarios starting from real facts and characters. It is like an invented time, but with real repercussions. From the point of view of speculative narrative, criticism, and social change are the motivation underlying the uchronic process, as in the case of the action strategies of activist group and radical environmental movement. Through the uchronic manipulation of time and reality, one can radically rethink the past and contribute to design the future, because building hypothetical scenarios in the sphere of fashion bears concrete transformative implications. The What If approach was specifically tested in a series of collaborative conversations with master's students carried out at the Università UAV di Venezia, Italy in 2020. The conversations also involve fashion designers, curators, professionals, and experts in environmental sustainability, digital fashion, and artificial intelligence. In each conversation, two fashion professionals were invited to propose and discuss a topic by asking the students one or more questions, starting with what if. The professionals chose the questions. All the conversations were motivated by a certain sense of urgency and the concern about the future. This series was conceived during the most critical months of the COVID-19 pandemic, which raised further questions about possible future of fashion and revealed its weaknesses in terms of places of production, time schedule, and the role of fashion designers. The question what if was a way to ask not only what the fashion of the future will be like, as I said, but also what future fashion can contribute to build. What happens when fashion begins to invent stories to support desirable rather than unsustainable futures. The raised question provided evidence of the potential that speculative fashion has in education in creating proactive approach to knowledge. For instance, Guia Manzoni, she's a fashion activist, and the fashion designer Giuditta Tanzi from a niche brand, this is called Garbage Core, asked the question of what would happen if the giant groups of luxury and fast fashion disappeared? A possibility, this, that seems increasingly concrete after the contraction in sales due to the pandemic, but which nevertheless pushed the participants to reflect on possible alternatives. The need of collaborative communities was at the heart of this conversation. The collaborative approach reverberated in the contribution of the students who took part to the project. Each conversation stimulated discussion on how fashion should be with regard to the social, environmental sustainability and in response to the radical change brought about by technological innovation and the pandemic crisis. Other two themes that emerged during the what-if conversation were the precarity of the fashion designer vis-à-vis artificial intelligence and the precarity of the real garment vis-à-vis the digital ones. What if fashion designer and the real garment disappear? These themes were introduced to the student by Giorgia Roversi of the Italian global e-commerce player Yux Net-a-Porter in conversation with Gloria Maria Cappelletti of ID Magazine. The advent of the digital is at the heart of the understanding of the what-if perspective of fashion, with this implication of the revision of design process, the figure of the fashion designer, the relationship with consumption, and the set of symbolic structures of fashion. Many of the questions asked by the professional invited in the discussion took real concern to the extremes, while the students' answers repeatedly stressed that the speculative approach enables the comprehension of our time's contradiction, but also opens a horizon of possibility, to adopt a definition of the Italian radical thinker Bifo Berardi. Another major outcome of what if is the role of speculative fashion in rethinking the idea of Italian history and its mainstream narrative, for example, founding a counter-history of the Made in Italy to overcome the narrative of the big brands and their cliché of glamour and beauty. To do so, the young creative director of the niche brand Vitelli, Mauro Simeonato, explained that he took inspiration for his design from an alternative history of the Made in Italy with the aim to highlighting the Italian fashion subaltern history. This implied the rediscovery of cosmic culture, an Italian club culture from the 80s, the culture of Italian provincial towns against the Milans as a fashion capital, and the punk attitude, which is common, he said, in the knitwear workshop around the country. By punk, he meant a do-it-yourself ethic and aesthetic, which involve a strong sense of community, ingenuity, and an anarchic approach to work. Simeonato's question was how to make a town shop when by town is meant the word. In conclusion, the paper claims that the way fashion plays with time and history can change the way people perceive and know reality. Instead of denouncing how fashion can distort our relationship between reality and truth, the uchronic and speculative approach to fashion can help students, lecturers, and practitioners to redirect the current dystopian reality toward a better and more sustainable world. It does so in the inventive and imaginative way that belongs to fashion and catalyzes a transformation. Thank you to everyone.